In brand new audio obtained by the New York Times during a call a few days after the attack on the Capitol in January of 2021, Minority Leader Kevin McCarthy urged Republican leadership not to attack lawmakers who they disagreed with over the outcome of the election. Here it is.
Tension is too high. The country is too crazy. I do not want to look back and think we caused something or we missed something and someone got hurt. I don't want to play politics with any of that.
I'm joined now by Michael Fanone, CNN law enforcement analyst and former D.C. Metropolitan Police officer who defended the Capitol on January 6, 2021 and sustained a number of injuries that day. Mike, what do you think listening to that audio?
My initial reaction was, McCarthy got it right. The rhetoric that was being spewed at that time by some of these fringe members of Congress on the Republican side was incredibly dangerous. It was insightful, and it resulted in the violence of January 6th. Unfortunately, rather than pursuing that moment, McCarthy opted to do some political maneuvering. Again, I think that Kevin McCarthy's interests are solely in himself and attaining the speakership. So rather than doing what was best for the country, what was best for Americans and our democracy, he did what was best for Kevin McCarthy to attain the speakership.
He's been denying that these things on tape happened, and yet there's tape of them happening. What do you say to that?
It doesn't surprise me, and people denied what happened on January 6th, and there's thousands and thousands of hours of videotape footage, body-worn camera footage. But I mean, that also speaks to, I think, where we're at as a country. Kevin McCarthy can deny those things, and people's distrust in, I don't know if you call it mainstream media, will allow for, a good part of this country to believe that McCarthy never said those things.
On tape, he also said that people were being endangered. He said that Trump was putting people in jeopardy. Let's listen to that.
So I'm calling Gates. I'm explaining to him. I don't know what I'm going to say, but I'm going to have some other people call him too. But the nature of if I'm getting briefing, I'm going to get another one from the FBI tomorrow. This is serious shit to cut this out.
Yeah, that's I mean, it's potentially illegal what he's doing.
Well, he's putting people in jeopardy.
Brooks apparently said, "Today is the day American patriots start taking down names and kicking ass," which I would say is even a step further than the kind of rhetorical take,
Well, if you think the president deserves to be impeached for his comment, that's almost like he goes further than what the president said.
He also said, "We saw what people would do in the Capitol. You know that these people came prepared with rope, with everything else." What do you think? How do you feel listening to that?
I don't know. I've become numb to the politics of this experience, so I don't expect anything less from McCarthy or from GOP leadership, for that matter. The Kevin McCarthy's and Mitch McConnell's of the world, I don't think they care about individual Americans. They care about their political careers. They've repressed any, ability to, experience real, human emotion. And that's unfortunate. I mean, the other thing of note, though, in that conversation, Kevin McCarthy was speaking with Steve Scalise. I would have liked to have seen Steve Scalise speak out a whole hell of a lot more after January 6th, being that, like myself, he's also a victim of political violence. And, again, GOP leadership position, and we just didn't see that. I don't know. It's disappointing.
If you could sit down and have a coffee or a beer with Kevin McCarthy, what would you want to say?
I don't know. I mean, I had a meeting with Kevin McCarthy, we had a lengthy discussion, didn't really get anywhere. We talked in circles. But I will drink a beer with just about anybody.
You talked in circles.
Yeah.
Explain that. Explain what you thought he was doing. Placating you? How would you, I don't mean to put words in your mouth, how would you describe what was happening?
Yeah, I think the meeting was only held because of the pressure that was being applied by the media to meet with me, just because of what my experience was like on January 6th. It was really for just for the optics. I think it came at a time where we're supposed to be celebrating law enforcement in this country. It was in or around National Police Week, and Kevin McCarthy didn't want to be seen as, acting negatively towards law enforcement because they count on law enforcement for votes. Just another example of political pandering in this country that takes place on both sides of the aisle.
You sound resigned, like you've given up on Republican leadership, which historically aligns itself with law enforcement doing the right thing by law enforcement.
I don't think one political party represents me or law enforcement or any particular group wholeheartedly. But I thought that was the point of our democracy. You have, you get a little bit from this side, you get a little bit from that side, and then hopefully people are able to come to a compromise, somewhere in the middle that makes everyone maybe not completely happy, but satisfied with the outcome. And we're just not there anymore in this country. Our political leaders aren't concerned about the future of our democracy. They're concerned about their own careers. We have too many politicians who think that they're like celebrities. I remember my first experiences on Capitol Hill, a reporter told me that, Congress is Hollywood for ugly people. And I've found that to be the case, more so than not, unfortunately.
Mike, it's always great to have you on. Thank you so much for responding to this recording that we're hearing. I appreciate it.
Yes, ma'am. Thank you.
$10,000 a day, that is what it's costing Donald Trump for failing to comply with a subpoena. But is it enough to compel him to cooperate?
A troubling economic forecast. A major bank warns a recession is coming.
Bring in CNN Scott McLean with the very latest here. Scott?
Hey, Brianna, yeah, those explosions in Russia, about 10 miles inside of the border in Russia, were heard, well, very early this morning, around 2:30 local time. And then it was 2 hours later that more explosions were heard 200 miles inside the border with Russia. Now, the Russians have repeatedly pointed the finger at the Ukrainians for similar strikes on Russian territory, on oil depots and other military targets. The Ukrainians have not directly claimed responsibility, but knew in just the last couple of minutes an advisor to President Zelensky has responded, and I just want to read you part of it. He said, how can you explain these? Well, very simply, if the Russians decide to attack another country en masse, kill everyone there en masse, crush peaceful people en masse with tanks, and use warehouses in your regions to provide the killings, then sooner or later, the debts will have to be repaid, adding that karma is a cruel thing. Now, Brianna, Russia is also this morning launching an economic attack on Poland and Bulgaria by shutting off the natural gas pipelines to those countries over their refusal to pay in rubles. Paying in rubles, of course, would strengthen the Russian currency, which at the outset of the war took a nosedive, but has since actually recovered pretty well. Now, one of the pipelines actually goes through Poland to Germany, and the Russians are warning the Poles that if they siphon gas off of that pipeline while it is in transit, that they may shut off the taps even to the Germans. Poland says that it does have enough natural gas for the moment. It has reserves, it has alternate sources. Bulgaria also not panicking at this moment, but keep in mind that 40% of Europe's gas comes from Russia. The EU is calling this blackmail. They are vowing to make a plan in response and come up with alternate sources. And one other point, and that's that on the ground in Ukraine, the chess pieces are undoubtedly moving. The Ukrainians say that the Russians have managed to take some smaller towns and villages in the east as Russian forces tried to move west, but the Ukrainians say that they have managed to repel some Russian attacks, 9 of them, they say, taking out a similar number of tanks, 11 artillery units, and a whole lot more Russian equipment. John, Brianna?
Are you getting a sense, Scott, of where the balance is here, though, with Ukrainians admitting that they're taking significant casualties there in the east?
It seems to be going back and forth in the eastern part of the country. The Ukrainians will claim back some territory while the Russians will take some towns and villages. You also have to remember that the map maybe isn't the most representative thing because there's large swaths of territory that have only small villages of them or are largely unpopulated or just open fields. And so actual territory is relatively easy to take. Taking some of these larger towns, though, and cities, that is a much taller order.
All right, Scott McLean live for us in Lviv. We do appreciate the report.
All right, Brianna, just to bring people up to speed on the reports we're getting in overnight. This is from Russian state media of attacks inside Russia. Let me show you where they are. It includes an attack on an ammunition depot allegedly in Belgorod, but also you can see a great distance further into Russia. This may be about 200 kilometers inside Russia at this other site, which would indicate an increasing capability, if true, of the Ukrainian reach, of the Ukrainian military. I want to bring in Sergei Lyshenko, senior advisor to President Zelensky's chief of staff. Sergei, thank you so much for being with us. Reports from the Russian side of strikes inside Russia, including Belgorod. What can you tell us about these reports?
I have no information about this. Unfortunately, just not my responsibility here.
Another advisor to President Zelensky, Mikhailo Podolyak, says, quote, sooner or later, the debts will have to be paid back. That's why disarming the Belgorod, other depots there, it's an absolutely natural process. He says karma is a cruel thing. Do you agree with that statement?
You know, in Ukraine, we have quite a democratic society, so people can speak, especially if it's in these current circumstances. But, you know, what happened in this Russian territory, it has to be asked to Russian people, Russian government, Russian leadership, Russian military commanders, what happened there. Because it's not our territory. We defend our territory, our territorial integrity, our independence, and we can't comment what's going on this territory.
Do you have the power at this point to attack inside Russia at a time of your choosing?
It's a very sensitive topic for military commanders to comment. I think it has to be addressed to the people who are responsible for this. For political leadership, it's not the topic for comment because it's, again, what I can say, it's the information which can be provided only by military commanders. But frankly speaking, general attitude is that Russia is responsible for what's going on their territory. They have to comment what's going on there. Ukraine can comment how Russia attacks Ukrainian territory. It's for sure one of the brutalest war from the Second World War finished. That is why I think we have to be clear that Russia will pay the price for this brutal war, bloody war. They started almost more than 2 months ago, frankly speaking. It's even more than 2 months of the war.
Let's talk about what's going on inside Ukrainian territory, if we can. Ukrainian officials confirming this morning that there has been some territorial loss. The Russians have made some gains in the east in Donbass, particularly in these areas here and here. How would you say, based on what you are hearing, how is the fight going in the east?
The fight on the east is like one of the most brutal wars, brutal battles after the Second World War finished, as I told you, because there is a huge concentration of Russian army, Russian soldiers, Russian military on our territory. This brutal invasion started 2 months ago with the idea to defeat government here in Kyiv, to kill Ukrainian president, to put some puppets in this chair of president here on the headquarters of president, to have Ukraine not just destroyed, but to have Ukraine as a part of Russian territory, to have Ukraine as a colony of Russia. And this was stopped by strong Ukrainian army and strong Ukrainian political leadership. It's never happened, and I believe will never happen in future. And that is why this war is, I believe, the contrapunct for the point of no return for the 21st century. This will have very long circumstances for very long consequences for Russia and very long going circumstances for the whole world. What we can say now that this war is not finished, and this optimism Ukrainian demonstrating, it's an example of our bravery, but at the same time we have to be united with the world to provide more weapons for Ukraine, to provide more sanctions, because if they occupy eastern part of Ukraine and south of Ukraine, it will be new country, Ukraine will lose the territory, and it's unacceptable for independent nation to be attacked by nuclear power, nuclear state, to occupy a big part of the territory. And our all negotiation efforts put on the point that all territory taken from 24 of February has to be sent back to Ukraine, provided back to Ukraine. That is why we put our negotiation efforts at the
Right, our thanks to Sergei Lashenko there. We do appear to be losing our contact with that advisor inside President Zelensky's office. Would not confirm the reports of Ukrainian attacks inside Russia. There was another advisor we quoted there who seems to be indicating or not backing off the notion that Ukraine was able to strike in there. But our thanks to Sergei Lashenko for that discussion. So John McCain once accused Senator Rand Paul of working for Vladimir Putin. Hear what Senator Paul just said that has garnered fresh criticism. Plus,
he's putting people in jeopardy, and he doesn't need to be doing this.
Explosive new audio of Kevin McCarthy. Is the minority leader's dream of becoming House Speaker slipping away?
And Donald Trump in contempt and facing massive fines. What happens if he simply ignores the judge's ruling?
All right, we do have breaking news. We're getting our first statement from the Ukrainians on a series of explosions inside Russia in these three locations right here. Now, the Ukrainians are not yet taking direct responsibility for the attacks, but an advisor to President Zelensky, Mikhailo Podolyak, says, quote, the Belgorod, Voronezh, and Kursk regions are now also beginning to actively study such a concept as demilitarizations. In these Russian regions, large fuel depots that provide fuel for the Russian army's armored vehicles periodically burn, and ammunition depots explode for various reasons. He goes on. How can this be explained? He says, very simply. If you, the Russians, decide to attack another country en masse, kill everyone there en masse, crush peaceful people en masse with tanks, and use warehouses in your region to provide the killings, then sooner or later your debts will have to be paid back. That's why disarming the Belgorod, Voronezh depots, he says, is an absolutely natural process. Karma is a cruel thing. So, Brianna, not directly confirming the attacks, but pretty loaded language there.
Yeah, it seems to be indicating something clearly, if vaguely. Thank you so much, Berman. I do want to talk now with a couple guests we have here in a contentious hearing with Secretary of State Antony Blinken. Senator Rand Paul appeared to rationalize Russia's invasion of Ukraine, saying this.
You could also argue the countries they've attacked were part of Russia.
Well,
we're part of the Soviet Union.
Yes, and I firmly disagree with that proposition. It is the fundamental right of these countries to decide their own future and their own destiny. And
I'm not saying it's not, but I'm saying that the countries that have been attacked, Georgia and Ukraine, were part of the Soviet Union.
And that does not give Russia the right to attack them.
Now, Senator Paul went on to echo several Russian talking points and criticized the United States for agitating for Ukraine to join NATO last fall, something Russia considers a red line.
There could have been voices before this invasion, instead of agitating for something that we knew our adversary absolutely hated and said was a red line as recently as last September. Before you signed the agreement, once again agitating for NATO, Russia said that it was a red line. Now, there is no justification for the invasion. I'm not saying that, but there are reasons for the invasion, and I think it's added nothing.
Joining us now, former U.S. Ambassador to Ukraine, William Taylor, and CNN national security correspondent, Kylie Atwood. During that first thing that Senator Paul said, you were making exasperated sounds, is how I'll put it. You were. I mean, what do you think when you hear him say that?
So, Brianna, those countries, Georgia, that the Russians invaded in 2008, and Ukraine, that Russians invaded in 2014, as well as today, they're sovereign nations. They've been sovereign nations since independence in 1991. 30 years they've been independent. Sovereign nations get to decide what their security arrangements are. And so for anyone to say that because they were part of an empire before, they can be attacked, it doesn't make any sense.
And that's the exact point that the Secretary of State very clearly made, right? He shut down Rand Paul's line of questioning, which was based on this idea that because these countries had at one point been part of the Soviet Union, that may have frustrated Putin even more when he heard about Ukraine's desires that have existed for a long time to join NATO, and that could have prompted them to invade Russia, to invade Ukraine. You heard the Secretary of State saying, listen, any country's history doesn't justify Russia invading them. The sovereign nation has the right to choose their own alliances. And the other thing that I think it's important to note that the Secretary of State pointed out was the fact that the United States had very real discussions with Russia about their security concerns before they invaded Ukraine. And he said that they found out very clearly that Russia wasn't actually just concerned about Ukraine joining NATO. Russia actually just didn't want Ukraine to be a sovereign, independent nation at all. And that's why those conversations fell apart. So the United States really did put in the effort to have the conversations about Russia, but Russia had essentially already decided, according to the U.S. government, that they were going ahead with this invasion.
The Biden administration also seems to be open to Ukraine remaining neutral between the West and Russia. And I wonder, Ambassador, if that is even possible when you look at, you know, the soul of where Ukraine is right now and where it is moving. It's hard to imagine it wanting to stay neutral between these parties.
Brianna, you got exactly the right question. What do the Ukrainians want? It doesn't really matter what the Russians want. It makes no. And other countries can have opinions about neutrality. But it's really important what the Ukrainians want. Now, there were times in the past month that they were thinking about neutrality. That was before these atrocities. That was before Bucha. That was before these war crimes. That was before what Joe Biden calls genocide. And so now to talk about neutrality, it's a different ballgame. And I think it's different in Ukraine, and that's where the decision has to be made. We can have opinions, but the Ukrainians will decide. They're sovereign. That's what we said before.
And aren't they allowed to decide where they want to be? I mean, look at Russia. Look at what Vladimir Putin has done with Russia. And Ukraine has made a very clear decision. It doesn't want to be under that umbrella, and it doesn't want to be like Russia.
Yeah, and it's very clear that Ukraine needs the support of NATO right now. They are only in this fight still because of that support. So it is hard to see a world in which they extract themselves from that relationship that has only grown so incredibly strong over the last few months. But it is a question as to how this war ends, right? And if you have the idea that that could be something that could trigger the war ending, then you do have experts out there who say that neutrality for Ukraine is something that should be entertained. So it'll be interesting to watch how it plays out over the next few months as we try to drive towards diplomacy, which we're obviously nowhere near close to right now.
Russia has made a significant move of cutting Bulgaria and Poland off from gas supply coming from Russia because they won't pay for it in rubles, which would obviously buoy that currency. What do you make of this?
So this hurts Russia. Russia is cutting itself off from revenues. It needs revenues. Europe has been talking for some time about cutting itself off totally from hydrocarbons from Russia. We see why. Russia is an unreliable supplier. It will cut you off no matter what you do, whether you pay or not. That's not a source of supply you want to be relying on. And it happens to be spring. That means the heating season is basically past us. So the Poles and the Bulgarians have some time to make some arrangements. The Greeks are already saying that they're going to help the Bulgarians out. The rest of Europe has got reserves, so they can get through this. But the long-term effect is going to be that Russia hurts itself by this action.
Not a reliable provider there. Ambassador Kiley, thank you so much to both of you.
All right, this morning.